Hello and welcome to the Grit Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. This is your host, Bryce Moose, otherwise known as the Commissioner and the only two-timer. Joining me today is my co-host, Jacob Kaplan. Jacob, how we doing?
Feeling great, brother. Ready to talk about some Moncks Corner Mugshots. Former champ Will, he's looking to make another run at a championship here, so this should be a good one. Fun one to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Will last season was kind of in the middle of like what he wanted to do. As the season went along, he decided to go more of the tank route, traded for a lot of young guys, kind of consolidated his roster a little bit, and then in this offseason has really decided to push his chips all in. I think as we stand here right now, pretty hard to argue that Will does not have the best or second best roster heading into the season. It gives him a great shot to be a repeat champion in the Grit League. So with that, Jake, you ready to dive in here?
Let's do it. Yeah, I'd like to say I think Will does, on paper, has the number one team to make a shot at the championship. On paper, I'd say it's his right now.
Yep, I'm with you. All right, so changing the format slightly today. What we want to do is talk about more of the position rather than just the individual player, and we're going to hit on these individual guys as we go through, but just to kind of keep this concise and less, dragging on. We're going to talk about the position group as a whole. So starting with QB here, Will has Trevor Lawrence leading the way. Trevor Lawrence is entering his third year in the NFL. Saw a huge jump last year. A lot due to the coaching aspect in general, going from Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson. His completion percentage was up from 58% to 66%. His touchdowns more than doubled. A lot of new faces in the building, including Calvin Ridley now and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram in year two. Everyone's excited about the Jaguars' offense, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider last year, honestly, Trevor's rookie season. I don't think he had a great coaching staff with Urban. There's just a lot of chaos, a lot of eyes on the Jags in that year, and I think this year is more his sophomore year, and I think it's going to prove well for Trevor, being that he already had this ridiculous rookie year, and then sophomore season, usually guys face a sophomore slump. He didn't face that. He got better, and I think it's going to get better for him going into this next season. With Calvin Ridley being there and Tanks Bigsby being there, I think the options are broader for Trevor, and I think he's going to have a great season.
Yeah, I think the main question around Trevor Lawrence when it comes to fantasy output is like, what is his true ceiling, right? Is he, he's QB7 in Dynasty. That feels right to me. He's right behind Lamar Jackson, I believe, who's QB6. But without the rushing upside, he's going to really have to throw for those 30 to 35 touchdown kind of season. Last year he threw for 4,100 yards and 25 TDs. Could he get to 4,530 TDs? I think he can with this offense. I mean, the Jaguars have a ton of expectations this year. Should be the clear division favorite. And how does this team react to kind of that pressure on them is really the question for me. But as far as Trevor Lawrence goes, I really don't have any concerns over him in Dynasty, and he's somebody who kind of fits every roster.
No, and I think that's why Will's kind of pretty much in a great position here. It's pretty safe, in my opinion. So Trevor, top 7 Dynasty asset, right? And then he's got Stafford, who's a very solid backup. He doesn't have as many weapons, but we've seen what Stafford's capable of in with the Rams. So if Trevor's kind of having that season where I think he finished QB8 last year. If he's having kind of some inconsistencies in those last 2 weeks, he finished QB 32 and QB 21. That's not what Will's going to want going into the championship, right? So he's in a safe spot to where he can ride Trevor Lawrence out and get those wins, get to the playoffs until maybe the trade deadline. And then if, say, there's a guy like just on my roster off the top of my head, Russell Wilson, who comes out of the gate on fire and doesn't really slow down, then Will can easily trade me Trevor Lawrence for Russell Wilson plus and kind of get a little more depth on his roster and get a QB that's red hot. I think he's in a great spot right now with these two quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think the interesting point here is Will definitely has the room to upgrade Trevor Lawrence if he wants to. If he wants to shoot for more of that ceiling, maybe get a mobile QB, or maybe just switch something around because he's not feeling Trevor in general.
Hmm.
It doesn't take much on top of Trevor Lawrence to get Josh Allen, to get Jalen Hurts. All those kind of trades are available for him. It just depends on what he really wants to do. As I said earlier, this roster is very consolidated at the top. Will has mentioned multiple times that he, doesn't have a lot of trades that make sense to him right now. It's kind of hard to make moves. He hates being in this position. Kind of leads to trading one of the star players on his team. If you really want to, less, not consolidate it and really get some options and some moving pieces. Trevor Lawrence is definitely somebody I could see him making a move from. But like you said, like Matt Stafford definitely provides that bye week security. And potentially if Trevor misses a game or two or something, no problem
Right.
starting Stafford, having him hop in there. So I think Will's in a good spot with his QBs.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, moving to running back. Will's position rank here is second out of 12. And I think it's worth noting that he's got three really good running backs. We talked about Zach's team with the three-headed monster. Will is kind of in that vein, except I wouldn't say they quite have the ceiling of some of Zach's guys. Like, I don't see anybody here having an RB1 overall season, maybe potentially Tony Pollard. But the other two guys are solid but not league winners. I guess that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, Tony Pollard's the one guy you don't really have any question marks about at this point. The second there is probably going to be Deuce Vaughn, which is more going to play into like their passing game. I don't see them jamming Deuce Vaughn up the middle too often. But then you look at guys like Kenneth Walker, Najee, and Khalil. Those are all guys who are probably going to be in committee and possibly could be overtaken at some point or time with their RB2 on that team. Like there's been tons of talk about Warren this offseason, about him being the go-to guy for fantasy. And then Charbonnet is there in Seattle. And then thankfully for Will's Chicago Bears, he's got Roshan as the possible RB2 there. So I mean he's got the RB1s in those committee at this point in time, but it's just got some guys that you have some question marks about that maybe he'll want to upgrade in those positions going forward.
Yeah, and speaking on Tony Pollard, last year, he was splitting time with Zeke. Zeke is now out of the door. I think there was a lot of questions in the offseason, like, hey, will the Cowboys go sign somebody else, one of these veterans, maybe a Fournette or somebody, just to kind of be that additional body in the room. They decided not to do it at all. Rico Dowdle is back. He missed the entire year last year. And Malik Davis stepped in, played a little bit down the stretch. We saw some nice things from him. But they didn't really upgrade at all. Either they trust those guys or really think Tony is capable of withstanding this full workload. I pulled up his stats as well. Just read these off real quick. Last year he had 193 carries for 1,007 yards and 9 touchdowns. Add in 37 catches for 370 and 3 touchdowns as well. And again, you start looking at the per game basis. He was a very capable RB2 last year. Now it's his backfield. He only started one game last year. Could this be the time where Tony really takes the jump? And I think it is.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, even coming off of injury, it seems like the Cowboys have no concern about him. They didn't take anybody in the offseason, like you said, and nobody in the draft really except for Deuce at the
Yep.
round 7. So again, I think he's going to have a great season. I think he's going to be heavily involved in the passing game like Zeke wasn't. So I think he's going to have that upside of getting the touches that Zeke was getting at maybe the goal line and getting involved in the passing game. So I think he's due for probably a top 10 RB season this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tony Pollard currently ranks as RB9 overall in Dynasty. I actually think that's a little too low. If you start looking at his per game stuff, like I said earlier, his yards per attempt was 5.2, which is really in that elite category. I mean, that's up there with the Saquons and for the guys who are, Nick Chubb's there as well. But the guys that are full-time players, Tony Pollard was doing this in a role where he, would come off the field randomly and couldn't get in that full rhythm. We've always seen the big plays. I think a lot of people in the fantasy community really like Tony Pollard. I think I can speak for a lot of us when I say we're just excited to see what he does in this full-time role. And I think he's really somebody who Will should be excited about as well.
Do you have any concern? Shoot, hold on. We can edit this out. I had a good question. Oh, okay. Do you have any concern that Tony Pollard might be this flash in the pan player where he's looks great this year, next year, and the years after that, not so much?
I think my biggest concern with him comes with just the workload stuff in general. I mean, he got literally less than half of the touches as Josh Jacobs last year, right?
Yeah,
Can he withstand all of this stuff? I think it's also worth mentioning that he signed a 1 year, $10.9 million deal in the offseason. So Tony Pollard's going to be an unrestricted free agent as we head into next year. For him, as he's looking as he's entering his prime now as a 26-year-old. Does he want to play for that big contract? Does he want to avoid a lot of the big hits? How does this add up now? Again, this is a guy who touched it 227 times and played in 27 games. Like Kenneth Walker did that and he missed 6 games. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot of questions about him, withholding this, the entire season. But I
yeah.
think in general, the talent is there. I think everyone will agree with Tony Pollard being a very, very good running back. I'm personally, he's somebody who I think all the teams that are trying to win would love to have him because the upside is like he could be, a true league winner, a top 3 running back. The
Yeah.
downside is he's still very good. Like unless he gets hurt, I don't really see the downside in Tony Pollard like not getting there. There's no one really to threaten him for touches. And then the most important stuff is he's going to play on these third downs as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think he's going to be heavily involved. He's going to take over the Zeke workload and continue to have what he had. The only question mark for me is going to be, can he withstand the workload? Which I think he can, you know.
Yeah, and do you think Tony Pollard at RB9 makes a lot of sense?
I think it does, given his age and what he did last season. He was very explosive, but I do think it might be as Dynasty RB9. It might be a little overhyped, just Dynasty wise. I think the season going forward, just this next season alone, I think he's going to be a top 10 back, no question.
Yeah.
But going forward, there, like you said, there's just question marks. Is it 1 year deal? If he gets hurt again, is he going to get another deal, or is he going to be a committee back going forward? But again, Dynasty is more of a redraft with longevity to it, right? Like you're really only concerned about what's going on this year. You're not too worried about 2024. Only some of the teams are, right? Like
Hmm.
you in your case, you're worried about 2024, but you're also worried about how JSN is going to perform this year, how guys on your team are going to do this year. Because their value is as it is right now. So RB9 may be a little overhyped, but I still think he's going to have a great season.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you too. I think he has a lot of paths to maintain this or maybe even increase it as we head into next year. Like if Tony Pollard just shocks everyone and hey, he's the overall running back 3 or
Yeah,
whatever this year, maybe the Cowboys give him some big extension. I could very much see him going up in value into next year. So I think the upside definitely outweighs the kind of downside scenarios with him. I think Will's got a really good player that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in as we get into the season.
yeah.
Anything else on Tony?
No, nothing on Tony. I just kind of want to talk about the rest of the running backs as a whole. I mean, if I were Will, I think we'll get into it a little bit later, but he's got this great wide receiver group, first out of the league. I would trade one of the top guys to maybe upgrade that spot, maybe go for like a James Conner type. No question about the backup. He's going to get the workload. He's a workhorse. He's
Mm-hmm.
handled it before and can have one of those top 5 to 10 running back seasons.
Yeah, I think that's somebody who definitely can make a lot of sense. Because speaking of some of these risky guys, I mean, we should probably talk about Kenneth Walker here, who
Yeah.
I think when we finished the season last year, I think everyone would have told you Kenneth Walker's probably running back 1 or 2 overall in Dynasty. He looked like a young star, ran for 1,000 yards, only played 11 games. He missed 6 with injury, still ran for over 1,000 yards and had 9 touchdowns. All those explosive big plays, almost like Tony Pollard's rookie year. Now that I think about it, but Surprisingly, they go out and draft Zach Charbonnet in the second round, and Zach Charbonnet is somebody who's actually really, really good. He does a lot of things that Kenneth Walker struggled with in his profile coming out. Talk about the pass catching again. Kenneth Walker last year caught 27 passes as a rookie. That's more than he caught his 4 years in college combined. Maybe the Seahawks kind of sat back and figured, like, hey, he probably shouldn't be doing it that much. Zach Charbonnet is a bigger back, used to pass protecting, played at two big-time programs. We said on the other show that I really like, we both like Zach Charbonnet as a prospect.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering how he fits in here. I thought that selection was kind of strange, and it really does create a lot of questions, I think, for Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, it creates a lot of questions, but I also think, given the workload that he had last year, I think it was a lot. I think going forward, the Seahawks are kind of just trying to change that up a little bit. I don't think they're losing any hope in Kenneth, like thinking he's going to fall out. I think they're just trying to get him a second hand to get in there and help, kind of like D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart type deal. I think they're both going to get a good workload throughout the season. I can easily still see Kenneth having like a 1,200, 1,300 yard season and 5-6 TDs. I don't think that's out of the question at all, just because they drafted Charbonnet in the second round. I think both of those guys are capable of that. I think it was just more of a worry about Kenneth's workload and how he can handle that. It didn't hold up last year, and I think they just wanted some insurance.
Let me ask you, like, does Kenneth Walker, do you feel like his upside that we saw last year, do you think he still has that with Charbonnet in that backfield?
As a pure runner, I still think he does. I think he runs the ball very well. I think he's kind of in that Nick Chubb talk of just a great runner. I wouldn't put him in the same tier, obviously, but I think he's up there as just being a great power runner. I just think that it's because of the workload and worries about Kenneth's longevity on the team.
Yeah, he is somebody who I have struggled with myself to rank. He's somebody I actually thought about trading for in the offseason when they drafted Charbonnet, just because I thought his value would be a little lower.
But
it kind of maintained for a while, and now it's kind of started to decrease. He's somebody who's kind of fallen a few spots overall and keep trade cut. I think the Seahawks offense has a lot of mouths to feed. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this team, and I think there's going to be a lot of inconsistent games for Kenneth Walker. For a team like Will, who definitely is trying to win and is not going to be okay if his team comes in third this year, if the inconsistencies show up, I think he could be somebody Will looks to move if he wants to upgrade that running back position.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I think that would be a good asset. I mean, maybe even now, if that does end up being the case, like you're saying, where he's just inconsistent and his value ends up dropping, I think it would be a good move for Will to move him now and get a James Conner type.
Yep, absolutely. And then Najee Harris, who's somebody who, was sadly my first overall pick in our startup dynasty.
Pick 5, I think.
I think pick 5, yeah. That, oh man. Just take me back.
It's good at the time.
Well,
he didn't want to do it, but
the thing is, Najee's never actually been very good ever since he got in the NFL. His yards per carry is 3.8 for his career. It was 3.7 last year. I mean, he literally has just run into his lineman and fall forward. The biggest thing I will say about Najee, and the reason that he's maintained this value, is he is a workhorse who has never missed a game. Right? When he is, touched the ball over 300 times last year, started all 17 games. He's definitely somebody who you can rely on. My question is now, as the Steelers have kind of pushed this Jalen Warren narrative a little bit, there's kind of some threats to Najee for the first time in his 3-year career.
Yeah, and we even started to see it happen last year, right? I think Jalen Ward's really started to get more opportunities, and then in the offseason, Tomlin was saying this guy is explosive. We want to get him more touches. So I think that's definitely going to happen again this year. I think Warren's going to get more touches, kind of more like the power back. I think Najee's still elusive. I don't know if I value him less than Kenneth Walker at the moment. I'm not sure if I do. You do?
I don't think I do. No, I don't think I do. I was going to say I think they're both actually too high on keep trade cuts overall stuff
Yeah.
because in general there's a lot of ways this goes sideways for both of those guys. I think Kenneth Walker's actually a really good football player. Najee, I'm just not so convinced on. I know his upside is there given his receiving, right? He's been a great pass catcher. He did it at Alabama.
Right.
He's done it in the NFL. Last year, we saw him playing 80-85% of the snaps every game. After the bye week, Jalen Warren started taking 30, 35, 40% of snaps. You know, in the preseason, Jalen Warren was getting goal line carries. They didn't take him off the field.
Yep.
The talk is from the beat writers, this could be a 55-45 split. We know Jalen Warren's explosive, and this guy was a track athlete when he played at Oklahoma State. Get to the NFL, we just saw him bust that 62-yarder in preseason.
Yep.
I think he's more of a threat than people realize to like legitimately hurt Najee this year. And I want to remind people too. I know Jalen Warren was undrafted, but this guy started playing football late. He's definitely a very good player, and I think he's like a legitimate case to actually have a role here for the Steelers.
Do you think we see it kind of where like Antonio Gibson was a wide receiver in college, great in the pass catching game, comes into the Commanders as a running back, and now they take Brian Robinson, and now he's going to start to get like the workload there at the RB position for like the power runs. Do you think Warren's going to start to take over the third and threes, those type of opportunities?
I think the Steelers are comfortable playing both in every role, right? The one thing you could say about Najee is that he is a good pass protector, and that's what keeps him on the field. That's why it was so hard to get Jalen Warren onto the field in general, was that Najee's great at protecting Kenny Pickett, obviously with a young quarterback. Like, you want to make sure that he's upright as much as possible. They haven't had a great offensive line last couple of seasons either. Made some improvements. I still don't think it's great. The division in general is very good. But I will say that Najee is already 25 years old. He's going to turn 26, I think around the Super Bowl. But he was a 23-year-old rookie who's already got over 650 touches in the NFL through 2 seasons. He's definitely somebody I could see wearing down kind of quickly. You know, without these injuries so far, it's definitely a little concerning, I think, in the big picture that Najee's just not going to maintain. I think that's kind of why they want to work in Warren a little bit more.
Yeah, he's somebody who in Dynasty especially I'd feel comfortable being as my flex 1 or flex 2 going forward, not somebody who's your RB2. Like you said earlier, he's very consistent. He's going to play. He hasn't really been injured before. He's going to go out and get you that 10 or 12 just off of pass catching ability alone.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. Right now, Najee is ranked as, was it RB12? Is that what that says? RB12 overall in Dynasty. Before we start the season next year, I have a number written down. Where do you think Najee is in the RB ranks?
I think if he dips, it's not going to be substantial. I think he'll still probably be around like RB18 would be my guess.
I had RB21 written down, so we're not that far off.
Yeah, I don't think that like it's going to be that drastic to where it's RB32 or something, right? I think any team is still going to want to have Najee on their roster just because of that pass catching ability and, like you mentioned, the pass protection.
Yeah, I struggle with him because I think there's so many ways that, because I mean, listen, the first year it was just Najee's backfield. The second year it was just Najee's backfield for half the games, and then we saw Warren mix in. If we see a lot of Warren this year and he looks clearly better, I think there's a lot of ways that Najee's kind of career outlook is sort of in question, and just how quick this can happen at running backs, like we saw with Zeke when Tony Pollard came to town, right? So I'm a little bit concerned about him going forward, but if you're a team like Will who's trying to win, I think Najee's actually kind of the perfect guy because he's going to get the touches, he's going to be featured, and he is consistent from just a weekly output kind of standpoint. So for a contender, I think Najee makes a lot of sense. The perfect player for a losing team to get off of their roster in general. So I do like what Will has established here. I think Kenneth Walker would be the one guy Will might look to move, though.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Najee is always going to, like we said, he's always going to go out and get that 10 at the bare minimum, and that's so important in our league with the flex spots. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, if it goes sideways for Kenneth, I think it's going to be more drastic than what it would be for Najee.
Yeah, and then lastly, before we move on from Najee, I should mention his stats from last year. So he had 272 carries for 1,034 yards and 7 touchdowns. He also caught 41 balls for 229 yards and 2 touchdowns. I say all that to say this. It took Najee 17 games to run for over 1,000 yards, and that's a little concerning. Again, like I said, 3.7 yards per carry is like staggeringly low. I mean, that's like in the veteran backup range. So if he can't improve that, I think the Steelers are going to really start to get concerned.
Yeah, I think he's just one of those guys that does everything good.
Yeah.
Nothing great.
He's never going to be a top 5 finisher in fantasy. I also think as long as he's getting the touches, he is going to have a role and be valuable. So he's kind of in that interesting mix.
Yeah.
Next, we probably should talk about the Bears' backfield here. We saw them draft Roschon Johnson. Khalil Herbert is still there. They signed Deontay Foreman. Will has 2 of the 3, which I think is a good spot to be in. And then as it relates to preseason, Khalil Herbert did play every snap with the starters for whatever you think that is worth. Khalil Herbert in a great spot, I think, to get a bunch of work this year.
Yeah, do you think this becomes more of a situation of like thunder and lightning rather than like Khalil is the guy?
I think the Bears don't even know. I think that they have 3 guys who I think they understand all 3 of them can play.
Yeah.
Whoever is the hot back on the day is going to get the carry. I think that is a headache for dynasty managers when you're trying to set your lineups every week. I think you're going to see a lot of situations where it's like Khalil got 14 carries, Roschon got 8, Deontay Foreman got 7, and it's like they all did okay. You know, you think they're all 3 pretty good. Who do I start next week? Right? I think they're going to have, like, the Bears' backfield is a very valuable place in fantasy. There's a lot of points to be scored there as much as they run the ball, as much as the short yardage stuff and everything that Fields does. Like, I think Khalil Herbert out of the 3 of those is the best pass catcher for whatever that's worth. Roschon is kind of a bigger body, good at the little things. He's going to have a role. He's going to play. Is he explosive? Is he special? I have no idea.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys that's a question mark right now. Like, he still got taken in the draft, which is amazing to see. I forget what round, but I think it was somewhere around the 4th round, right?
I think he was a 3rd rounder, actually.
Yeah, 3rd round pick, and I think that's a lot to say for a guy who was a backup in college, albeit behind Bajan. But like, I don't know. I think they've watched their film on him and they like what they saw. It's not too often that a backup goes in the 3rd round. You see a guy like Zach Evans drop to the 7th round. And Roschon's sitting there at the 3rd, and they took him happily. So, could it end up being one of these situations like we saw in Detroit last year with Swift and Williams? I don't think so. But again, I think either way it goes, it's going to be good for Will. He's got both of I'd say the main guys there in the backfield.
Yeah, and as far as it comes down to the rankings, I think I'm actually higher on Khalil Herbert and lower on Roschon Johnson. Just in general, like Khalil, I think is actually a little bit better than RB32 when it comes to dynasty. I think he can really
I'd
play.
agree with that.
The only reason
How old is
he's
he?
25, I believe.
Yeah.
He was a senior at Virginia Tech. This should be his 3rd year, so 25. Yeah. I will say this. Khalil Herbert has a chance to be a league winner. Okay, I'm going to throw this out here. There is a shot, if any of these Bears guys take the backfield over, they could be somebody that we view as you had to have them to win, much like a Zay Jones from last year, a Travis Kelce from last year. I think Khalil's kind of got that sneaky, just monster upside, because there's a shot he could shut off Deontay Foreman and Roschon Johnson, who I think are more similar than people want to admit.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think Khalil is one of those guys, especially in like redraft leagues, that you can get in the later rounds, and he's going to have that pass catching draw to him. We even saw it in the preseason. He catches a screen pass and goes for 30-something yards and a touchdown, right? So he's he's valued pretty low right now. So in my opinion, that's why I wouldn't include Khalil in a trade if I was Will until he actually like breaks out. And if he does break out and shuts down the other two backs, you might as well just keep him for the remainder of the season.
Last thing I'm going to mention on Khalil Herbert. He led the NFL in yards per carry last year. I think that's a stat that no one wants to acknowledge because he played on that gimmicky Bears offense. I just don't think it's nothing. That's all I want to say. And he takes on Jerome Ford.
No takes on Jerome Ford.
I got some takes on Jerome Ford.
Go for it.
I got some takes on Jerome Ford. So Jerome Ford, if people don't realize this, Jerome Ford was a 5-star recruit who went to Alabama. Because of Najee Harris, he actually transferred to Cincinnati. So that Desmond Ridder, Jerome Ford Cincinnati offense was, with a college football playoff right there.
Yeah.
Jerome Ford was the guy. He's a big, strong, athletic dude. Been dealing with some injuries lately. They took him 5th round in the draft a season ago. It was kind of a lot of question marks there, just given all of the Browns running backs that they have. I think Jerome Ford's somebody who actually really can play, though. A lot of people in the best ball community are talking about Jerome Ford as about 14th, 15th round pick. I think he's somebody who has potential to be like an actual good NFL player. I don't know how how that kind of factors in behind Chubb without an injury, but I want people to realize like Jerome Ford is not a zero. He's a good little player.
Do you think he ends up having like a Kareem Hunt season?
I think he's going to play. The Browns have never shown that they want to give Nick Chubb these 25 to 30 touch games. I think Jerome Ford's somebody who definitely could get, even if it's 8 to 10 carries a game, maybe a couple catches. Something to get Will excited. I think he is the perfect person to be holding here as like an RB6 because, when you're leveraging your team against Zach, who is so dependent on what Nick Chubb does, he's actually a player I'd kind of refuse to trade to Zach because it's like, listen, if Chubb gets hurt, I have all of the leverage.
Yeah.
He's somebody who, you talk about trades that could happen mid-season, you could see Jerome Ford go for something, kind of crazy, I think, when it comes to value. Definitely a player I would be wanting to hold if I'm Will.
Yeah, and then looking down the list at Raheem Blackshear, do you think, for me, with Miles Sanders, if you had my team, what would you get, or what would you try to give right now for Raheem?
I think Raheem Blackshear is a stone zero. I would not be willing to give you anything for him, or give Will anything for him. I think he's just one of these guys. I think he's literally a camp body who would be lucky to make the team and hope he can do some kickoff returns. It sounds like Chuba's going to be this direct backup. Chuba's going to have a role. I think if Miles Sanders gets hurt, sure, Raheem Blackshear can step in. I don't think he's any good. He was never good in college either. Just kind of a guy who can do enough well to make a team, but somebody the Panthers I think would be happy to replace.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Deion Jackson, definitely should hint on him with everything going on with Jonathan Taylor. I mentioned a couple shows ago that Zach Moss broke his arm. He should be back by about week 2 in the NFL season. However, if Jonathan Taylor is traded and they don't get a running back in return, Deion Jackson is going to be your week 1 starter. And all of a sudden, Will's running back room is not only the best in the league, but almost unbeatable if that's the case. Does Jonathan Taylor get traded? And he takes there.
I mean, he requested permission to get traded. Is he somebody that the Eagles might want? It's possible.
It's possible.
I don't think so. I don't think he wants to play for that owner there. I don't think he's having a good time for him. So
no,
I don't blame him. With they're kind of airing out the dirty laundry a little bit. So if I'm Jonathan Taylor, I would look to go somewhere else and try to use my prime to get somebody a championship. So if I put myself in JT's shoes, yes, I would want to trade and I would be seeking it out. Which again, in that case, Deion Jack would be a great asset to have.
I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be there for week 1. I think so. As of recording this today, I think so. However, if he is traded, I would not be shocked at all. It sounds like he's very unhappy. Jim Irsay is also a hothead who can do some pretty crazy stuff. If they get offered a second round pick for him,
Yeah,
I mean,
you might take it.
you might take it because look, they got enough bodies to just
Yeah,
keep
you don't
Anthony
want that
Richardson.
headache.
Yeah, they got enough to keep Anthony Richardson upright. You get an additional pick. The Colts are not a Super Bowl contender this year. We're just trying to help Anthony Richardson learn. As we go into next year, I think the Colts are going to start to fill out the rest of this roster. If JT doesn't want to be there, I definitely could see them basically saying just, okay, fine, you want to go? Here's a second round pick, and we are good. So
Yeah.
if that happens, to be honest with you, I don't think it does. But if it happens, Deion Jackson is going to be somebody who probably triples overnight on keep trade cuts value.
You think it's more he's the backup than Evan Hull?
It's going to be Deion's backfield first. They're both going to play. Well, really, it's Zach Moss who I think becomes interesting. Zach Moss definitely the biggest of the three. Deion Jackson's kind of a little quick guy, but showed enough last year, I think, to three-headed something. I don't know if monster's the term.
Yeah, we saw enough of Zach Moss down the stretch last year where they seemed comfortable with him in the backfield.
They're comfortable with him. He's another one of those guys who's just a good pass protector. And you think about Anthony Richardson, what they're trying to do. I think they just keep him healthy, hope he can learn as he goes this year. Zach Moss kind of being a pass protector and stepping in. And I think he makes a lot of sense to play. As far as fantasy goes, I have no idea. I just think the Colts are the kind of team that could really, really bomb out really quickly. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's not an offense I really want to be involved in this season.
No, and Michael Pittman. I know we haven't gotten to Jonah's team yet. Michael Pittman, somebody who kind of scares me overall. I've got Alec Pierce and Anthony Richardson. We'll definitely get there eventually. But as far as running backs go, I think Will is set up pretty well here. As I said earlier, he's second overall in grit when it comes to running back rankings, and he's got two guys in Jerome Ford and Deion Jackson who could be worth a lot more as we get into this season. So if that's the case, I think Will's got kind of the team that a lot of people are going to be calling him to make some deals. I would say Kenneth Walker, again, is the most likely to be moved off of his team. And I think if I'm Will, Kenneth Walker would definitely be somebody I'm watching this first couple Seahawks games, trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Moving on to wide receivers. You want to take the reins here for the overall?
Yeah, I'll take the reins here. For the overall, I think Will's set up great, man. He's got Jamar Chase, who's Dynasty asset 1 or 2 behind Justin Jefferson as it is, and then he's got the force-fed monster Cooper Kupp at as his wide receiver 4 currently on Dynasty rankings. So I think he's set up great. Again, if it were me, I would probably move one of these wide receiver 2 types, like the Jalen Waddles or the Devonta Smith. They're wide receiver 2 on the teams that they play for. And I think I would try to move those for another guy on another team who's a wide receiver 2, but isn't seen as that, as valuable as Waddle or Devonta Smith, and try to upgrade to a more workhorse running back like James Conner.
Yeah, we probably should lead the way here with Jamar Chase. In case Austin's listening to this, Jamar Chase did overtake Justin Jefferson as overall Dynasty #1 player today. I checked this morning. So I checked this morning. He was second. I refreshed the page and he was first. So I thought that was interesting. Probably worth mentioning with Jamar Chase. His rookie year, he had that insane 81 catch, 1,455 yard, 13 touchdown season as a 21-year-old. Just unbelievable. Last year, he missed his 5 games, still ended with over 1,000 yards, still had 9 touchdowns. Looks to be the kind of receiver who is going to be either the best or second best in this league for a decade. I have zero concerns here. Sometimes you try to look at the downside on some players, but I would say it's 80% chance he plays his entire career with Joe Burrow?
That was a point I was going to bring up. I think he could easily play 10 years with Joe Burrow. That's definitely not out of the question. Teammates in college, they have this great connection. I don't see why the Bengals would really want to give that up at this point, showing that, it's worked so well so far.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me, I think he would be my #1 overall player in Dynasty as well. there is almost zero risk. Like outside of him having some catastrophic injury, like there is zero risk to his production.
Who do you think in a vacuum who would be like the better receiver, Jefferson or Chase?
I think Justin Jefferson is better.
Yeah.
I think Jamar Chase is set up for this. He could
Better
put on one of the
situation.
better situation because again, with Justin Jefferson, like Kirk Cousins is not going to be there forever. We don't know what the Vikings will do. The two quarterbacks that they've drafted during Kirk Cousins' tenure have both been terrible. Kellen Mond now like out of the league. And then who was it? I can't remember the other guy, some 5th-round pick who never played. So they're going to have to figure out what's behind Kirk Cousins eventually. Probably next offseason you'll start seeing some stuff there. It's just more inherent risk, so I think that's why Jamar Chase would be my one. But again, if you're going to ask me about this year, I think Justin Jefferson would be my number one overall player in fantasy football. Jamar Chase would come in second.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I mean, you look at the other guys. Will's next dynasty wide receiver asset, Waddle. Again, a guy who's kind of like the wide receiver two on his team, but still, great fantasy output. I forget where he finished at last year, but honestly, I think him and Tyreek work so well together. I think Tyreek kind of stretches the field, and Waddle kind of hits the mid range for Tua, and I think they crush it together. The concern there, I think you mentioned it on another pod. The last 4 games of the season, production started to go down. Do we see that again?
Yeah.
It's very possible. I'd rather have Tyreek over Waddle on that team. I think Tyreek is what makes the team great. But again, like we talked about, I think Waddle would be the one guy that I would move going forward.
So I got a couple hot takes about Jalen Waddle here. And before I get into this, I should recap last year. He had 75 catches for 1,356 yards and 8 touchdowns. Just a monster season, right? Absolutely nothing bad to say about last year. What I do want to point out is that with 75 catches and nearly 1,400 yards, that is just an absurd. It's 18.8 yards per catch. Led the NFL. Is that something that is repetitive? Like, can he do this for multiple seasons? We saw so many big plays out of him. They get him the ball all over the field. No questions there. My question is, I don't think Jalen Waddle is ever going to be a number 1 receiver in the NFL. Like, I think he's probably the best number 2. It's him or T. Higgins, probably. But I think a lot of his success is because Tyreek is there. And we talked about Tyreek. I think he's just one of the best. Yeah, he's like a generational speed receiver. And with the Dolphins having those 2 guys, no team has defenders fast enough for both of them. Busted plays are going to happen. I don't think Jalen Waddle is that good. I mean, and I know you follow Matt Harmon and some of the stuff that Reception Perception does. He is very low on Jalen Waddle as an actual talent. I think that's worth mentioning. He is basically a 2-route player, which is the go route and the post route. Everything else he just doesn't do very well. He was in the 50th percentile against man coverage. For being as fast as he is, that's a little concerning, I think. My hot take is that Jalen Waddle just had his best career season. And look, I think his overall placement in Dynasty, again, 9th overall in Dynasty rankings. 9th overall player. I don't personally see it. I think that is way too high, probably 10 spots too high.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I'd rather have Devontae Smith over Waddle. Both Alabama guys, but Devontae Smith, the Heisman winner, had a great season last year. And I think, again, when we look at it, I don't think A.J. Brown is the reason that Devonta Smith is good. I think Tyreek makes Waddle a lot better, but I think Devonta Smith he's a great wide receiver, and I would definitely have him above Waddle in the Dynasty rankings, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I would probably flop their rankings around. I probably would have Waddle more closer to wide receiver 15. I mean, we see Kupp there at 16. If you get a couple more years out of Kupp, I think that they probably should be a lot closer. Maybe Kupp's a little too low. That's a different discussion. But in general, again, the Dolphins play in the AFC East. 3 great defenses, 3 great cornerbacks he has to face every single year. A lot of cold weather games. Again, we saw down the stretch, this team can really fall off late. I think there's just a lot of question marks around Waddle that people don't want to acknowledge just because he's fun and he's exciting. I know we love the touchdown
Waddle.
dances, but
Yeah.
exactly. Hot take. Jalen Waddle will be sold off of Will's team before Week 5 of the NFL season. I think Will is going to be sick with his inconsistencies, and he's going to move him for more of a consistent player on the outside.
Yeah, I might disagree with you there. I think he's still going to have the consistent output. I think my concern is more on Tua at this point.
Yeah.
Because I think Tyreek is going to be there for the next couple of years, at least two. So right now, I don't think that should hurt Waddle at all. Just being that he kind of relies on him, I think, in the passing game and opening up the routes. But I still think he's going to be getting open. Still does well on getting some separation. He doesn't have the greatest success, but he's still successful out there with Tyreek. And I think if he's there for another 2 years, should be fine. I'd say probably finishes the year maybe around wide receiver 15 would be my guess.
Wide receiver
Like
15 would be your guess?
Just fantasy alone, not
Okay. That's fair.
yeah.
I don't have a problem with that take. I think, again, this year, as long as the Dolphins don't have that much threat, or there's not that many threats to him, I still think he should be fine.
Yeah.
I just think that we kind of saw the best you're going to see from Waddle. That might look silly because I know what he can do, but again, that's going to be the stand I take personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree there. I do think that is probably the best we're going to see. I don't expect much of a dip going forward.
All right, so we probably should talk about Devontae Smith a little here next. I know you mentioned that you would rather have him, maybe have him higher than Jalen Waddle in the overall rankings. Again, he is the Eagles' number 2 behind A.J. Brown. Really showed a huge step in year 1 to year 2 last year. Where are you standing with him right now?
I mean, I feel great about him. Everyone was questioning his size being a factor coming into the NFL, and obviously that was not an issue, right? I think he's going to do great. I think he'll probably have a very similar season to last year. I don't see a dip happening. They've got these A.J. Brown, Swift, and still a great offensive line. And from what I've seen in training camp so far, him and Hurts have been connecting probably more than A.J. Brown has. But, I still think, the Heisman winner is a great piece to have on my team. I would love to have him as a wide receiver 2 or 1 on my Dynasty team.
Yeah, and I think what really stood out to me about last season for him in particular was really that playoff run. The overall stats for the season were nothing crazy impressive. Again, he had a slow start to the season, still ended with 95 catches for nearly 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. With stats like that, usually you'd be ranked more in the wide receiver 2 range overall in Dynasty. But I think what people saw from Devontae Smith is like, hey, listen, this guy's just really good. Can he be the number 1 on the team? I think so. I actually feel better about him than Waddle. But again, he doesn't really have that dominator profile of being, the big body, huge touchdown kind of guy. But he's somebody who does everything really well and just fits so well with that Eagles offense. I just don't really have a lot of questions with him. I mean, he's going to be set up for success for years to come. Obviously, he's younger than A.J. Brown. He should probably be an Eagle for, I would think, a little longer. I think A.J. Brown's actually more likely to move on when his contract is up than Devontae Smith. But again, he's still at least got 3 more years playing for this Jalen Hurts offense with his deal. I don't really have a lot of concerns. I totally get where he's ranked in Dynasty.
Yeah, Dynasty value alone, if you switch him and Garrett Wilson, given their situations, who would you rather have? If you put Garrett Wilson on the Eagles and Devonta Smith on the Jets.
Man, that's interesting.
It's an interesting question because I
think they're close. I think they're
very
close. So I think Garrett Wilson's better than Devontae Smith. He's a little bit bigger. He's a little bit faster. But the situation with being Aaron Rodgers number 1 is just so appealing in fantasy in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think he could have a similar kind of season to what you're going to see from Garrett Wilson. But again, I think they're both like either way you put it. I think they're both very clear top 10 dynasty wide receivers.
Yeah.
Is there anything else with him before we move on to Cup?
No, I think Devonta Smith is going to have a great season. I don't see, you know, either way, I don't think it's going to be that much of a positive or that much of a negative on his game in this next season. I think it's going to be very similar to what he had last year.
Yeah, the last thing I'll note with him is we saw the Eagles have this crazy easy schedule last year. Do a lot of front running where they're just pulling these guys in the third quarter, fourth quarter, whatever. I think overall season stats actually might go up for Devontae Smith this year. I think this is my bet would be he clears 1,200 pretty easily as long as he's healthy in terms of yards. The Eagles should get pushed a little harder this year. Again, they're going to play all the number one teams in the NFC from last year. The division, I think, is slightly improved. The Cowboys, about the same level of talent. I think the Commanders are a little bit better. Giants are still there, but I really think Devontae Smith is somebody who we could look at this in 12 months. He could still be right where he is or even higher. Waddle is the one I'm a little bit slightly more concerned about when it comes to these younger receivers that Will has.
Yeah.
I think the overall picture here, though, is that we haven't even gotten to Cooper Kupp, and these are three guys who are all just fantasy monsters. In order for this team to lose, a lot's going to have to go wrong for guys that you don't really have a lot of questions for, right?
Yeah, exactly. The only question is Waddle and the actual dynasty value. I think fantasy output is going to be fine. That's why, in my opinion, I'd probably move Waddle and get someone who's a wide receiver too on another team and upgrade the running back position. These guys, he's got a great group of top four wide receivers who are all fantasy alone easily are going to be in the wide receiver 15 range.
Yeah, all four of these guys, right?
Yeah.
So probably should mention Cooper Kupp's 2021 season, the big record-breaking season, 190 targets, 145 catches, 1,947 yards, 16 touchdowns, right? Last year, he couldn't maintain the same pace. He was still on pace for 1,500 yards, but that kind of record-breaking season, I don't think you're going to see that again unless it's from either Jefferson or Chase. Again, Cooper Kupp is entering his age 30 season. He played 9 games last year before getting shut down for the rest of the year. He's now a 30-year-old off of a knee surgery playing with a 36-year-old quarterback off of an elbow surgery. There's a lot of ways this goes sideways, but again, Cooper Kupp is so... The way the Rams are constructed is Cooper Kupp has to be force-fed the ball for them to play well, and that's kind of what this season is looking like. Again, if you look at in redraft, Cooper Kupp is typically the 4th overall pick, and that is very, very rare for somebody coming off of a season-ending injury.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that kind of annihilates the zone and does everything else well. And given a force-fed opportunity, I think that plays really well into a PPR situation. Mm-hmm. Again, Dynasty, are you going to get the value from Kupp at this point if you're a championship team? The only thing that Will would really get from Cooper Kupp is maybe a solid piece in picks, in my opinion. Which he doesn't really want anything to do with picks at this point unless he switches routes and goes to tanking. Again, a guy who can easily finish in the top 15 in a PPR format. I would not be looking to move Kupp at all.
I would say Kupp is probably the favorite to be overall wide receiver 3 in season long this year. Again, with health, everything we'll see.
Yeah.
The way this goes sideways, though, is this is the first of these 3 receivers that there is ways this goes sideways, which is just the Rams are just not that deep of a team. They have a lot of problems overall. If the Rams start out a little slow again, they start losing games. Would it shock anybody if Cooper Kupp is kind of shut down or rested towards the end of the year? Does Stafford have enough left in the tank to be a Super Bowl quarterback anymore? I don't know. Rams are a team that I think the market is kind of polarized on. A lot of people think they could be a playoff team again. A lot of people think they could be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. I don't know. I guess where I stand on him is I think he's somebody who's going to go from contender to contender in our dynasty league. He's somebody that half the teams don't even want to trade for midseason.
Right.
Half the teams would love to have him, but you have that inherent risk, so it's hard to offer a fair value for him. And I think that's why he's ranked at wide receiver 16 overall in Dynasty, even though he's 24 months removed from, well, actually less than that, really, from having that record-breaking season.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I think the wide receiver 16 there is like, okay, if he gets hurt again, does he retire? Kind of one of those things, but like, there's nobody to compete with him on targets there. Is it Tyler Higbee? He still might get 10 a game, but Cooper Kupp is going to get 10 as well. Or is it Pookie Nuki? Is he going to get the targets? I don't think so. I think, if anything, Puka is going to be the guy that takes the top off the defense and goes downfield, where Cooper Kupp is just slicing them up and getting force fed.
In order for Kupp to fail or to not hit his projections, you are counting on the trio of Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell, and Puka Nacua like legitimately hurting his fantasy output.
Yeah.
Again, I sound crazy even saying that, which is why, like Cooper Kupp, yes, he is probably a top 3 player this year again in fantasy, just because he's force fed. Again, can he stay healthy? That's the point that, or that's the part that really makes the most, cause for concern, I guess.
Yeah. Again, he would easily be a great wide receiver 2, if not 1, on any contending team.
Yeah, and as we look at the rest of Will's receivers here, outside of these top 4 is kind of, I guess it's confusing to me. This was the first part of this roster I was kind of a little confused by it, and that's just because Josh Downs is his 5th overall ranked receiver. Josh Downs was a 3rd-round pick slot receiver who's now going into this kind of a nightmare situation for pass catchers at Indianapolis, at least until we figure out what Anthony Richardson is.
Yeah.
He's kind of a good trade piece because somebody like my team, hey, I'll take Josh Downs on absolutely. Sure. But again, one of these guys misses time, bye weeks come up, whatever it may be. If you have to play that next receiver, I don't think Will's going to feel good about Josh Downs at all on the team that is trying to win.
No, yeah, I mean, I think his next guy up in the wide receiver group is probably Rashid. As of right now, I do have a hot take that I think A.T. Perry will become a viable flex option this season. But given what we see right now, you're looking at Rashid probably being your next guy in out of this wide receiver group, because Donovan Peoples-Jones is probably going to get overtaken by Elijah Moore at this point.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next point. Every single player below Josh Downs has now a worse situation than they did the previous season.
Yeah.
Right? So think about it. So DPJ, Elijah Moore comes to town. KJ Osborne, Jordan Addison comes to town. David Bell, Cedric Tillman comes to town. Yeah, buried on this depth chart. Might not even make the team. I think KJ Osborne still has something. I actually think he's pretty good. But again, in terms of like playing these guys in the flex, KJ Osborne is not that every down kind of number 2 right now.
It's kind of 30 or 0 or 20 or 0.
Yeah, he's definitely
his way or not.
If you get the Vikings in the shootout where they're playing the 3 receiver sets the whole game, I could definitely see him having a good season, or multiple good games. I think this would be the position group that Will is trying to move. Oh, I also should mention Rashid Shaheed. We actually have a healthy Michael Thomas for the first time since 2019, so he doesn't get all these free routes. A.T. Perry's looked good so far. Was he just playing out of necessity, or is he actually really good? A lot of questions there on Will's end of his wide receiver bench.
Yeah, and even though Michael Thomas is healthy, he's still 30 years old and hasn't played a full season for I don't know how long, but there's already been some concern that his game is like okay right now, right? So that's kind of where I'm thinking A.T. Perry could be that guy that comes in, because I do think aside from Olave, obviously in that wide receiver room, it's kind of wide open for some opportunity.
A lot of mouths to feed in New Orleans. I mean, that is going to be that's a team that we're going to have some answers on as the season gets started. I think right now they might have the most up in the air kind of situation for fantasy producers in the league. So
especially
definitely
after Kendrick comes in and catches a diving 35-yard catch.
if Kareem Hunt gets like 8 carries and 2 catches in week 1, I think everyone's going to have a panic attack. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But anything else in this receiver room you want to talk about? Any Parker Washington or Dontavian Wicks takes?
No, nothing about them. I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Wicks for DFS. Great play.
Dontavian Wicks, I think I played on every single Saturday for 2 years. Virginia's #1. He can play. I never saw him as much of an NFL guy. He's kind of in this weird situation with the Packers now. He made that big catch in preseason, but definitely somebody to keep an eye on.
Yeah, a lot of mouths to feed in Green Bay. If his situation were elsewhere, I'd probably have a hot take on him. But
yeah,
he's kind of buried.
It's just so hard to see him mattering at all this year as a rookie. It really is.
Yep.
All right, so to the #1 overall tight end, probably the best tight end to ever play the sport. We can talk about Trey McBride, but no, let's talk Travis Kelce.
About Kelce. Yeah, I mean, Will got Kelce for 2.07, which ends up being Rashee Rice, and I mean, I'll take that any day of the week. Even if Kelce were to play, this was his last year, I'm taking that trade every day. I think the difference between Travis Kelce and even maybe Mark Andrews at times can be like the 10 points a week. It's very easily the case. But even if you have like Andrews and Kelce in like tier 1, and then the drop off after that is insane. So that's why great job by Will making that trade, and I would do that every day.
Every single day. And I'll be honest with you, like Travis Kelce is somebody who I've never been the biggest fan of, and kind of doing some prep for this show, like I kind of went through his numbers just trying to figure out like how good has he actually been. Where does it compare to some of the stuff that we've seen from tight ends in the past? Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, prime George Kittle, like where does all this stuff kind of line up? I think what I realized is like Travis Kelce might not be anywhere close to slowing down, because he just had his best career season at 33 years old, a very similar season he had at 31 years old. I found an interesting stat, too, I wanted to throw out here. Travis Kelce has missed one football game since 2014. I mean,
that's insane.
For a tight end who plays... Yeah.
I mean, you look at Gronk's situation, the guy was crushed.
Yeah, I mean, he had to retire purely out of injury. I mean, he still could play football, but it's just not worth getting hurt every 5 seconds. And
yeah.
Kelce sits here again. He's never dealt with an injury. Like, never had a major injury in the NFL. He's in the situation with Pat Mahomes, who might be the best quarterback to ever play the sport. And I guess my question is, like, what do you look for as a sign of this guy slowing down? Like, sure, like maybe he doesn't have 1,400 yards and whatever he had, 12 touchdowns again. Like, maybe he doesn't do that again, but he's still going to be tight end 1 probably, unless something material changes. And Xander kind of gave him up for nothing.
Yeah, he Will got him for nothing, and unless there's a massive injury to Kelce's game, I don't see him really taking the time off. The #1 and 2 target share competition there is MVS and Sky Moore right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm a Sky Moore truther, right? But like, it's Sky Moore. Like they just proved that they can win a Super Bowl with Juju as their #1 wide receiver, who only had 800 yards last season.
Yeah.
So I would take 207 for Travis Kelce all day long.
And I was going to say too, like usually the sign of the team being more worried about Kelce getting older or being near retirement is usually what they tell us in the offseason. Again, they didn't upgrade their tight end room. The wide receiver room, you could even argue, got worse, with losing Juju and Mecole Hardman. Mm-hmm. Travis Kelce is going to get to play, I would think, either 2 or 3 more years, like with prime Pat Mahomes. And as long as he doesn't get hurt, is there any threat to him not being tight end 1 or at least having a 1,000-yard season?
No, and even with Bieniemy gone, I think they're still going to make these ways for Kelce to just get touchdowns on touchdowns. I mean, he's a touchdown goblin. They'll throw him a shovel pass at the line of scrimmage. I don't see that changing at all, even in the next 2 to 3 years.
No, and I think I was kind of thinking about like what would cause Kelsey to retire that wasn't a major injury. Okay, so if the Eagles win the Super Bowl and his brother gets one, maybe they both walk away. But I think Kelsey might be sitting here saying, I could win two more Super Bowls before I retire. Like, and
Yeah,
if
I mean,
if that's true, I mean, we could be looking at 37-year-old Travis Kelsey still out here doing this, and Will got him for actually free.
yeah, I think it's insane that he got him for that value, and I don't think unless Pat Mahomes moves away or they kind of, I think Travis probably wants to retire as a Chief. I don't see that changing.
Yep.
So if anything changes there, I could see that being the issue. But I mean, Pat Mahomes is going to be there for the next 8 years, 7, 8 years, or whatever. So
Yeah.
got him for dirt cheap.
Yeah, and it's like
So
you
thanks,
even
Xander. Appreciate it.
it's crazy. Like the more you think about it, too. I mean, we saw Kyle Pitts go fifth overall in the draft, kind of projected to have these monster seasons. We've seen him have 1,000-yard season. Brock Bowers, who we're going to talk about on the upcoming NFL draft show that we do, he's going to have the same kind of projections as he comes into the league. Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, all of they're drafted higher than they normally would have because of what Kelsey has done. He's really changed the league at the position. What he just did is the kind of season you are like begging for. Like you don't even think is like even possible for Kyle Pitts right now. So what Kelsey is doing even still at his age is just so hard to replicate, and Will's going to have this advantage. And we've already talked about the rest of his very good running backs, very, very good receivers with multiple outs and ways that things can go. Look, if Waddle doesn't start off great and Will does want to trade him, he can make that move and get a ton for him because Jalen Waddle's a 24-year-old, third-year receiver. So I just don't see a way that this goes bad unless he has like catastrophic injury luck.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But looking at the rest of this tight end group, sorry to change subjects.
Oh no, you're
we can edit that out, whatever. Trey McBride versus Hayden Hurst. Is that too big of a gap?
Hayden Hurst is so old. It's a problem. He's a 25-year-old rookie when he was drafted. I think he's already 30. Like, I guess so. Where I stand is I didn't see Trey McBride do a lot last year that makes me think he's like any good.
Yeah,
only thing
with Ertz being out.
Yeah, and like with him being a smaller school guy who was a second-round pick, I don't really know too much about him other than what other people in the community tell me. I'm not out here watching William and Mary highlights, so look, like I think Hayden Hurst is set up for like a decent season. He's a very good backup tight end to have, and he doesn't really have a lot of competition on the Panthers. Trey McBride, in this miserable Cardinal situation, maybe he kind of steps into a role that we could envision for him. He's going to play a ton, so we will see.
Yeah. Do you think Hayden Hurst will have a better season than Trey this season?
Yeah, I do. I just think it's going to be so hard for the Cardinals to move the ball. I think
that's why I'm like surprised at that tight end 19 versus tight end 36. I think it's just a massive gap. Is Hayden Hurst really the 36?
Hayden Hurst is just a little, he's a little underrated. We saw what he could do last year with the Bengals, and he had a great season. Now he's going to be Bryce Young's kind of security blanket. I think he's a perfectly fine backup to have. He should, when it comes to Dynasty, I don't think you want Hayden Hurst starting for your team. Like, he shouldn't be like a top 12 tight end or anything, but is he 10 tight ends worse than Jelani Woods? Probably not.
No.
Overall, what kind of predictions do you have for Will's team, or any more hot takes you want to throw out there?
My only prediction is that I think, I side with you. I think he probably does move Waddle, regardless of inconsistencies or what have you around that week 5 in upgrades. And right now, Will would be my favorite to win the league.
Yeah, I have him here. I said he's going to go 12-2 and end up being the overall grit champion.
Yeah.
I think this team has so many ways it can go right and just not a lot of ways it can go wrong. We've talked about a lot of these teams and a lot of the concerns we have about players and situations. It's very rare that it all kind of lines up where Will's got like literally 4 or 5 guys who, without an injury, I can't really see it going wrong for. Does he make a move to upgrade Trevor Lawrence? Does he want to shore up his kind of fourth and fifth receiver? If you move Waddle and you get two very solid receivers instead of maybe that every week, starter, there's so many ways he could go about this. I know Will is dying to trade, so one of these guys having a bad week or maybe a great week, like if I don't know, DPJ comes out and has a great game or something, Will can make a move there. I think his team is going to stay pretty consistent this entire year, and I really don't see too many trades being made unless he gets offered something he can't refuse.
Yeah, and I think he just kind of has this depth at both positions where it's like not very deep at wide receiver, not very deep at running back, but I think it's a good kind of middle ground for both to where if he suffers an injury in one spot, he can easily replace with one of those guys. But I think just to piggyback off what you mentioned with like if anything were to go wrong, I think it's just going to be in this running back group. And again, I think he'll be just fine. I don't think it's going to be to the point where it hurts him so badly that it's going to take his chances away from a championship.
He's going to win the positional scoring every single week at receiver and tight end, like the entire season.
Yeah.
Right? If his running backs are fine, if Trevor Lawrence is just, again, if he just hits his quarterback slot of quarterback 7, like, I think this is going to be the team that we're looking up at the end of the season saying, man, how did we let him put this together?
Xander.
Yeah. You think, yeah.
Yeah. Would you do that trade that I talked about? Say Russell Wilson comes out red hot, isn't slowing down at all, right around the trade deadline, and you see some inconsistencies with Trevor. Would you do Trevor for Russell Wilson plus?
It depends what the plus is. Like, I think I'd be more willing to try and upgrade Trevor. You go to, I think Blake has Josh Allen, and you just said like, hey, like let me do Trevor Lawrence plus for Josh Allen. Because if you want a young quarterback in their prime, no threat of being benched or anything like that, I think it's a kind of upgrade you can make. You get a little bit more upside maybe.
Or if we even make it Aaron Rodgers, who's coming out QB1 for the whole season.
I kind of feel like it's a risk he doesn't need to take. Right? Like it almost feels like Will just putting the phone away and just waking up in October. His team's going to be like 8-1.
Which will be hard for him, but yeah.
Oh, it's going to be very hard for him. And that's what I mean. Like I think he's going to actually make some moves just purely out of boredom, or he's going to have one guy have one bad game. He's like, all right, I'm selling Cup.
Yeah.
Again, the last thing I had written down here that I just wanted to mention real quick is if Jamar Chase ends up getting hurt or missing time, Will has a real path to kind of recoup that instantly. So, like, let's say Jamar Chase tears his ACL out for the season, right? Let's say it happens week 4. If he comes to me and says, I'll give you Jamar Chase for 3 first-round picks, like, I do that trade 100%, right?
Yeah.
He then can sell those first-round picks for other players to teams that are just not that, start off 3-3 or 2-4 or whatever, who say, okay, I probably should get my pick back. So I think he's got a lot of ways to fix this, even if things go wrong. And again, my prediction for the overall grit champion.
Agreed.
All right, Jacob, any final words?
No, it was a pleasure. Enjoyed going through the Moncks Corner Mugshots.
All right. Next time we will be talking about Xander's Lebanon Lumberjacks, another show that's been highly requested and looked forward to. Going to be a different kind of tone and mood for that one than we have here.
Straight up battering ram.
Yeah. So thanks again for listening, everyone, and we will see you next time.